Hey guys, Andrey is here, and in this video we're going to discuss the Modern Steinitz Defense in Ruy Lopez. After moves e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, the original Steinitz Defense goes with immediate d6, but the modern one includes also moves a6 and bishop to a4. Of course, it may never happen if white captures on c6 right now, but anyway, the vast majority of players prefer bishop to a4 move, so this additional a6 and bishop a4 gives black some opportunities in the later stage of the game, because b5 is already prepared. I mean, just imagine this situation, and you want to play a6 followed by b5 to get rid of the bishop on this a4, e8 diagonal. In this particular case, it may take, like 2 moves. And in some situations, it may be possible for white to take on c6 with some benefits. When the bishop is already on a4 and the pawn on a6, well, you just play b5 and you get rid of this bishop. That's one of the advantages of having these moves a6 and bishop a4 included. As for the rest, the ideas are very similar. So let's try to understand what is the point behind playing d6, limiting the own dark squared bishop. As we have already discussed in previous videos, e5 point plays a great role here. So it's a central pawn, central square, and if it goes away somewhere, white builds up a strong pawn center. So black wants to have this pawn exactly where it is at the moment. And d6 really helps to protect the pawn. Black accepts the temporal passivity of the bishop on f8, or whenever it goes somewhere, it's maybe also not so active for some time, but it's okay, because the main idea is just to make e5 safe. Also, d6 has some advantages after that move. Dark squared bishop is passive, but light squared bishop gets some new opportunities. For example, it may go to d7, not super active position, but pretty safe, controlling everything important. Pay attention also that this bishop now controls f5, and black may think of playing f5 at the later stage of the game. So it's just okay to play d6 in this position. White has different options here, and one of the most common is just to continue with the c3. So since there is no attack against e4, and white doesn't have to protect it, why not to spend a move to prepare programmatic d4? And now black has a choice. So the normal way to play that, the classic way to play it, the modern Steinitz, is just to play bishop to d7 and then continue with the development of the king side. But there is one interesting option which may work as a surprise weapon. It is f7, f5, exactly in this position. So black is undermining the e4, pretty similar to, Vienna game or King's Gambit, but reversed, and tries to build up a strong pawn center if white plays not correct moves. There are different options for white to react. If white doesn't know this line exactly, one of the first moves that may come to mind is to counterattack with the d4, because at very first glance it looks super strong, with the following idea. So now black captures on e4, and white may try this knight takes e5 move. So what's the point behind it? Well, white is trying to use the weakened diagonal h5, e8 in this case, which is a typical thing when anyone moves the f-pawn in the open game at so early stage. So after knight takes e5, the knight on c6 is hanging. It's obviously natural to capture it. Then comes queen to h5 check. And here black has to play accurate moves. So if king remains on the diagonal e8, a4, then after something like d5, white may regain the missing material and actually get very good position, because the king is definitely misplaced. If, for instance, black plays something like g6 here, then white may capture on e5 immediately, or after bishop c6 check, attacking the king and the rook. So the correct move here is king to e7. It's the only good option for black, but this is just enough. So now bishop captures c6, b takes c6. After that, bishop jumps to g5. So white's attack looks very strong, but black has very good defense. So first of all, knight f6, that was forced because queen was heading on d8. D captures e5, and now queen goes to the central square d5. This is pretty surprising, but exactly this move actually saves the material on the board, at least giving black some chances to survive it. The main idea being that if pawn captures on f6, then g takes f6, attacking the bishop, and this bishop is pinned. So queen is heading, bishop cannot go away somewhere, and black will take that bishop very soon. So this is good for black, obviously. So white normally tries something else, bishop to h4 first, protecting the pawn on e5 and creating a threat of taking on f6. But then the king bravely goes to e6. I think it's pretty symbolic that something like this happens in the opening line named after the first world champion, because it was exactly the principle of Steinitz who said that the king is a strong piece and can defend itself. So after king e6, white doesn't really have anything better than just taking the knight on f6 with the bishop, because pawn e5 is still pinned, and the queen is now hanging because the knight is no longer pinned. So bishop captures f6, now g takes f6, black is a minor piece up, so the best option for white here is just to continue with the perpetual check after king f5, king goes back, and so on. So this looks pretty dangerous for black, but with the accurate play, black survives it. So if white wants to play for a win, after black's f7, f5, he or she should try something else. Let's have a look at white's options there. There are different, but in my opinion, the most ambitious one and the most straightforward at the same time is e4 takes f5. So in this case, white is not afraid of something like e4. It's too premature to play something like this for black because knight then goes to d4 using the fact that knight on c6 is pinned. And we may notice that black has several serious problems. So knight is hanging, e6 square needs to be protected, as well as the diagonal h5, e8 is now so weakened, and f5 actually plays a great role in creating some annoying threats there because black cannot play g6 against queen h5 check. So e4 is not very good, but bishop captures on f5 looks pretty natural. So as a result of this operation, black managed to develop the light squared bishop, and at very first glance created a threat of bishop to d3. So white has to react somehow. It's possible to play d4 exactly here, but I think that it's better to start with Kathleen. It may look a bit strange that white actually gives black a chance to occupy d3, stopping the pawn on d2, but it appears that bishop on d3 is not necessarily that perfectly placed. If black doesn't go to d3 square with the bishop, then, well, position is pretty dangerous because white is ready to play d4, open the center, open the e-file, and just start the attack against the king, which is definitely misplaced at the moment. And you should also take into account the fact that black's pieces on the king side are not developed yet. So bishop d3 looks very good at first glance, just stopping white's development almost completely. Rook goes to e1 now, and black develops the bishop on e7. So black is pretty close to complete the development of the king side. White has to undertake something right now to prove that his position is superior. So rook goes to e3 now, attacking the bishop. That's really interesting thing. Then black continues with the very natural e4, supporting the bishop and attacking the knight, but knight is not really hanging because bishop is protected by that exact pawn. And now white has to do something. So if knight simply goes to e1, attacking the bishop, then black has an interesting resource, which is bishop to g5, starting the attack of that rook. So it's not very pleasant. So in this position, white starts with a very interesting, yet strange looking knight to a3 move. So what is the point behind this move? Well, first of all, the knight now controls c4 square and b5 square, so potential squares that light squared bishop of black could have occupied. Now, any efficient attack against the bishop may be the last one for this guy in this game, so black has to be very careful. Another interesting thing about this move is it is kind of wait-and move, so it appears that black doesn't have a useful one. So for example, if you place knight f6, which is the main line, and we get back to this in several minutes, bishop g5 no longer exists, and white may attack the bishop with the knight at e1 move. But first, let's try to understand what happens if black plays very logical and natural move b7, b5, attacking the bishop. Appears that in this case, black actually weakens light-squared complex so much that white can even sacrifice the exchange on d3. So light-squared bishop of black is the only defender of light squares. I mean, the only efficient defender of light squares, and without that guy on the board, white has easy access to all light squared weaknesses. Now, black has two options, just to take the rook or maybe to take the bishop first. Let's start with b captures a4. In that case, queen takes a4, attacking the knight on c6. So black captures the rook. What else? Now queen captures c6. King goes to f7, and now queen to d5. King goes to f8, let's say, and then queen captures on d3. So in this case, we can see that as a result, white has two pawns as a material compensation for the missing exchange. The positional meaning of this sacrifice is that all light squares are weak in black's camp, and in addition, the king can no longer castle. So white's position should be better in this case. Another option is to take the rook immediately. Let's have a look at it. So after rook takes d3, black captures the rook, and now white captures on b5. So that's the point. With the help of this additional sacrifice, white actually gets to light squared weaknesses of black. So bishop takes b5, attacking the knight on c6. Now the only natural defense is queen to d7, because if you simply go away with the king to f8, then after bishop captures c6, something like rook to a7, black cannot even play rook a6 attacking the bishop, because then bishop simply goes to b5 and takes the pawn. So something like rook to a7 may lead to knight d4. So e6 is also light square. It is weakened, so why not to create a threat there? Queen goes to c8, and now something like a4. So white has nice pawn majority on the queen side and starts pushing pawns there. This bishop on c6 is just dominating the field. Finally, what if queen to d7? Let's have a look at that option. So here, after queen to d7, black protects the knight on c6, and nominally just a rook up, but not for long, because white has very simple knight to d4 move, and it's really unclear how black is going to protect everything what is hanging. There are so many pieces on light squares, and white is going to win this position. So b7, b5, although logical, actually loses almost immediately. Let's have a look if knight to f6 actually improves the situation. So here, black decides to continue with the knight to f6 move, normal development move. At first glance, just overprotecting everything that is here in the center, this pawn on e4, and hence the bishop on d3. But after white's knight to e1 move, we can notice that knight a3 had a serious idea behind. So now c4 is now possible to occupy, as well as b5. So after b7, b5 with the pawn, knight captures the bishop on d3, and the mission is complete, basically, because after the elimination of such an important piece, which was the key defender of light squares, the whole board becomes pretty vulnerable. Well, at least its light squared part. After b takes a4, knight goes to f4, attacking e6 already, and after something like queen to d7, white may want to undermine e4 pawn immediately, simultaneously solving the problem of the development of the dark squared bishop potentially. And we can see that the pawn structure is just awful for black. So pawn like a4 is definitely not very healthy. So as we can see, f5 is an interesting try, obviously, but it may be only a good surprise weapon. If white is well prepared, it's probably not so recommended. So let's get back to more classic main line. The main direction is bishop to d7, developing the light squared bishop, dealing with the penal on a4, e8 diagonal, and switching to the development of the king side pieces. So situation in the center looks pretty solid right now. White continues with the programmatic d4, grabbing space and increasing pressure in the center. As usual, for such a pawn formation, White has two options, actually to take the pawn on e5 a bit later, or maybe to play d5, and Black has to take into account both. Normal way to play this is to continue with the g6 move, because indeed position of the bishop on e7 will be too passive. And for now, when everything is okay with the center, Black may consider to play g6 and put the bishop to potentially much better position. Sometimes bishop remains passive even on h8, a1 diagonal, especially if White is close in the center. But g6 is also a useful move to control f5 square in advance, and in case of the closed pawn structure, Black may want to play f5. But we will see these things a bit later in this video. So e5 is not hanging. I mean, if you are wondering if it is possible to take on c6 first and then to take on e5 several times, well, e4 will be hanging, so that will be compensated. That's why normally White continues with the natural castling, and Black plays either bishop to g7 or knight to e7. Knight to e7 may look a bit strange, but it's a flexible development of the knight here. So from e7, the knight supports another knight, and Black can simply forget about the problem with the e5. Now it's definitely overprotected. For example, if bishop takes knight, another knight is just replacing the one on c6, and e5 is still protected. That is the one idea behind this development. Another one is just to be able to play f5 at any suitable moment. So when the knight is on f6, let's say, it's not so simple to do that, so you will have to spend some time moving the knight somewhere and then playing f5. If the knight is on e7, well, it's already possible. But there is a problem with the knight on e7, so if White doesn't take on c6 and doesn't close the position, well, it's quite hard to justify the knight on e7. It's rather passive here. So one of the possibilities for White here, and I find it extremely annoying for Black, is to play simple d takes e5. And after d takes e5, White simply develops the bishop to e3. It looks like a serious simplification of the situation, but it has some logic behind it. So Black played g6, saying that, well, the bishop is going to occupy g7 square. So now White's bishop goes to e3 to control c5 square, which will be left unprotected after bishop to g7 move. That's the first thing. Second thing, after d takes e5, the pawn structure is fixed here, so e5 pawn is blockaded, and bishop on g7 will be rather passive. That's the idea. So position is simple, but don't be fooled by this simplicity. In fact, White has some annoying pressure here. After something like bishop to g7, natural knight to d2, b6, covering c5 square, because if, for example, Black castles here, something like bishop c5 can be always very annoying. There are too many pins here, so b6 makes sense to prevent that move. And after that, White plays b4, grabbing additional space, for example, castling. Bishop steps back to b3, now exerting pressure on f7 and preparing a4. King goes to h8, White plays a4, and after something like queen e8, preparing the activation of the rook with the rook to d8, White may play a5. So here we can see that Black is very passive. All the minor pieces don't have real targets, while White is enjoying position with extra space, and after a5, potentially get into c5, which may be a good outpost for different minor pieces. So let's get back to more natural bishop to g7 move. In this case, Black keeps two options, develop the knight to f6 or e7, depending on the situation. So bishop goes to g7, and here White has different options, but I personally find the d4, d5 plan the easiest and the most efficient, although it may be not the best, but from a practical point of view, it's probably one of the best. So after d5, White attacks the knight and tries to exchange light square bishops. White is so important because after this exchange, we get the pawn structure which is pretty similar to the King's Indian Defense. If you're not familiar with that opening, just check it out. You will see a lot of similarities here. So the point is that after c4 move, white starts the attack on the queen side. So white's plan here is just to prepare c5 and to break through the c or b file. So basically anything which will be opened will be used, and the idea is to create a weakness potential on d6. Black is going to do the similar thing on the king side to start the attack against the king potentially. And in the King's Indian Defense, the light squared bishop plays an amazing role, because that bishop, just imagine it is still on the board, supports the f5 first of all, and later on when position escalates, this bishop may be used as an attacking piece. So for example, to sacrifice the bishop on h3 or somewhere is a pretty typical thing. Here there is no longer this bishop on the board, so Black's potential attack on the king side doesn't look that efficient and hence that dangerous, while the absence of the light squared bishop in white's camp doesn't really affect the efficiency of the queenside play, because everything is based on c4, c5, which is a dark square, and dark square bishop is still there to support this thing. For instance, h6, by the way, the absence of the light squared bishop also forces Black to make something like this, because if Black plays immediate f5, there is really unpleasant knight to g5, bringing the knight to e6, so this is an amazing position for the knight. h6 is simply necessary prophylaxis here. Knight goes to c3, f5. Now, typical maneuver, knight goes to e1. Also very popular in King's Indian Defense, because the knight is going to d3. And from there, the knight will actually support c5 and also control some squares on the king side. Knight goes to f6. Pawn e4 is supported by the pawn f3. For instance, castling. Then knight goes to d3, supporting c4, c5. And here, if Black plays f4, closing the position on the king side and preparing g5, g4, or maybe h5, g4, and so on, white starts his own attack on c5. As you can see, white is simply faster here. It doesn't mean, though, that this position is already quite bad for Black. So instead of playing f4, Black may consider some active operations on the other side of the board. So c6, trying to create some pressure here on d5, so that's stopping white from at least immediate c5, because d5 will be hanging. And let's say after queen to e2, some sort of preparation, white may want to develop the bishop a bit later to either e3 or d2. It's not clear yet where it will be the most useful. And after something like b5, Black exerts further pressure there on the queen side. White probably wants to support the pawn on c4 as well. And here Black may decide, so there is some potential for closing the position entirely on the queen side with the help of some extreme measures like c5 and b4. But we should never forget, when we have this pawn chains, there is another typical thing, so the minor piece may be sacrificed for several pawns, and then one of the sides will get super powerful connected passers. So this position is pretty unclear, I would say. It should be more or less balanced, but anyway, taking into account that this bishop is so passive, I would take white. But it's just my personal preference. In fact, well, this position is being played on the grandmaster level, so there are many players who prefer to have this position as Black. So that's it. We have discussed most important concepts of the modern Steinitz. In the next video, we're going to discuss what are the most common traps within this opening line. See you there.